This is TVO. It's been 7 great years, but this is it, the last Science Edition. Hello, I'm Stuart McLean.
And I'm Lauren Millar.
And tonight, the two of us are here to say farewell after 7 years of the Science Edition. This is our final episode, and we want to show you some of the best moments from our 7 years on the air. But more than that, we also want to give you a glimpse of what it's been like putting the show together.
We tried to take the science out of the physics lab and put it into everyday life. And to do that, we took you across the continent, from the British Columbia rainforest to the Saguenay River. We looked at the issues that affect us all directly.
The Science Edition has brought you hundreds of stories, 340 to be exact. But time has come for the Science Edition to sign off, so tonight, a tribute to everyone who's put their hearts into making this program what it's been.
First, we'll take you back to some of the places we went and look at some of those issues. Three years ago, this item introduced Canadians to their own rainforests and to a big problem. Canada has been called the Brazil of the North, and not because we have rainforests too, but because we're cutting them down at a similar rate. These giants were just saplings when the Roman Empire crumbled, and now they're being clear-cut. This item introduced the problem and examined some of the serious consequences of a disappearing rainforest.
It's very difficult to tell exactly how old this forest is. Based on fairly preliminary evidence so far, it looks like it's been at least 1,500 to 2,000 years since there was a fire here. So that this stand that you see, there's been forest growing here without a major interruption, such as a big fire, for at least 1,500 years.
Now this is taking you about as far away from a rainforest as you can get. Last year, while dodging traffic in Los Angeles, we took you to see some scientists who would like to see smoggy freeways become a thing of the past. And in just 10 years, 10% of all cars sold in California must be clean. And scientists here are doing groundbreaking work on hydrogen-fueled cars as an alternative to gasoline. Now, this piece brought the issue home to Canada and examined what that means for all of us.
By the year 2005.
Yeah, between 3 and 4 hours in the morning and 3 and 4 hours in the afternoon. Every day where drivers can't ride.
We have 60,000 people employed in the Greater Toronto Area working on auto.
We took you from the LA freeways to the Arctic to show you just how extensive environmental toxins have become. 3 years ago, this item confirmed that pollution in the Arctic is destroying a traditional way of life. A 1987 study indicated that PCB levels were 5 times higher in the Inuit than in the southern populations, and these levels are similar throughout a wide region of the north. The native diet relies heavily on wildlife, but while this food is rich in nutrients, there's a concern it also contains toxic chemicals. Sea mammals are the most polluted. The contaminants are found mostly in the fat or blubber. The next most contaminated is the liver, and then finally, the meat. Cooking does not get rid of the problem.
It's impossible to predict the future of the beluga, to know the outcome of its struggle to survive. The park's future is more certain. It's an attempt to preserve and protect the unique area and all who live there from nature's toughest foe, human beings. Hopefully the park will at least serve as a symbol, because much more than the future of the beluga is at stake here.
Even the beluga whales in the Saguenay River are dying of cancer from toxin-filled water. Although a marine park now protects the whales, only about 500 have survived. There were at least 10,000 at the turn of the century.
Like the canary in the coal mine, the belugas are sending us a message. Hopefully we're listening.
Baseball is also repetitious. To learn
They say there's no such thing as a bad story, just a bad reporter. So when one of our producers, a baseball fanatic, suggested looking at the science of baseball, no one was surprised. No one was convinced it was a good idea either. But he headed off, and he was able to turn up some science behind the training of baseball's million-dollar boys and turn out this item.
The batters must take thousands of swings each year. This use or overuse of muscles is the leading cause of baseball injuries. While the Blue Jays were warming up in Florida, the weather was warming up at Nakiska, Alberta. Spring weather there caused snowmaking equipment to run overtime, so we had perfect conditions for the science of snowmaking. And who would think science would be a vital part of your ski vacation? Something else we learned in the Rockies is that snow can be a dangerous thing. Our item on avalanches looked at what scientists know about them and how to control them.
The largest number of personal injuries from avalanches involves skiers. That's why ski areas pay such close attention to dangerous snow conditions. When a problem is spotted, charges are carried to the top of the mountain. The fuse is pulled, and the charge is tossed into an area where buildup could threaten skiers in the valley below.
So we always let it run until we can see the fuse droop here. But sometimes we're in a whiteout, lots of snow, and you can't tell whether it's lit or not. You got, the fuse is roughly 1 meter long. You have 2 minutes and 40 seconds with it. So we do have quite a bit of time. Come on, stick. All right.
We took you from the top of the Rockies to the shipwrecks under Georgian Bay. Last year, the Science Edition visited Fathom 5 National Park when we looked at the stresses on our national park system.
The Alice G is a steam tugboat that sank in about 15 meters of water. Most of the wrecks in Fathom 5 Park are steamers or schooners that date back to the 1800s, when navigating the treacherous waters of Georgian Bay was a serious challenge. While the park preserves history and geology, maybe its most significant role is providing a pure playground for tourists. This idea of separating wilderness preservation and tourism could save our entire national park system.
Welcome to the Science Edition. I'm Stuart McLean. I'm Stuart McLean. I'm Stuart McLean. Hello, I'm Stuart McLean. Tonight, we're going to venture into the world of the unknown. But first, a 20th century Icarus.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
Hello, I'm Stuart McLean, and if you can see this photo,
320.
could you please send help?
Every day you hear news stories that have science in them, but they aren't necessarily about science. The Science Edition team was always looking at the science behind the news to give you more information and a broader perspective on things.
For example, in the summer of 1985, more than 1,000 people died in plane crashes around the world, and that made many people more conscious about plane safety. Well, it got us thinking about it too. Often it seems that the only thing that survives a plane crash is the black box, that flight recorder. Well, we wanted to find out more about this mysterious device, so we went to the National Research Council lab in Ottawa to look inside of one. Of course, one of the first things we found out is that the black box isn't black at all. It's orange. And inside, the box records voices from the cockpit as well as data from the flight instruments. With that information, investigators can actually recreate the final moments of a flight.
Reconstruct the flight path. Using the recorded data, we compute the true airspeed of the aircraft. We're able to compute the flight path coordinates. And we developed very early on CRT displays of the flight path.
Gas, gas, gas!
This exercise simulates a deadly chemical gas attack. The rule at the school is mask in 9 or die. This means that in the event of a chemical attack, they have 9 seconds to get their gas masks on.
When the Gulf War broke out in 1991, one of the greatest fears was chemical weapons. The Science Edition traveled to CFB Borden to see how Canadian troops were preparing to face this threat.
Are lined on the inside with a layer of activated charcoal. This prevents vapors from penetrating through to the body. In 1990, Love Canal was back in the news. In the late 70s, more than 800 families abandoned their homes on this site because of toxic waste contamination.
The baby was born. When it was born, it was on the outside of the body. Then you come to my home. I have a child with birth defect and 2 miscarriages. The people that lived in prior to me, he died of cancer.
In 1990, after a major cleanup effort, the state of New York has put many of these homes back on the market, below market value, and people are returning to the area, buying them up. We traveled to Love Canal to ask, can a toxic dump site like this ever really be clean? Reminders of the poisons owners fled more than a decade ago. A $100 down payment and government reassurances that the homes are habitable has lured more than 300 potential buyers. These 14 million burning tires caught the world's attention in 1990. The Hagersville tire fire burned for more than 16 days. Within a year, the rest of the media had put Hagersville on the back burner. But we went back for another look. To look around here, especially at this time of year, it's hard to imagine that this very spot 1 year ago was an inferno. Now it looks more like an excavation site than the scene of a tire fire. But it's what's below the ground here that's now a major concern. In spite of the best efforts of firefighters, hundreds of thousands of liters of oil leaked through the ground here. Now the shallow water table and the limestone layer are contaminated with oil and with the chemicals that are released when tires burn. Chemicals with names like xylene, toluene, benzene, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And scientists say they just don't know enough about our tolerance to these chemicals or what they could do to us in combination.
Well, the role of the astronaut in interfacing with scientists...
When Canadian astronauts make the news, it's usually because they've made it into space. What we don't often see are the years of training before a shuttle mission. Canadian space travelers aren't just astronauts, they're also scientists, and they spend months with other scientists designing experiments for microgravity.
We know that when you're up there, it's not quite like doing the experiment on a lab bench down here on Earth. There are constraints of time, size, types of materials that you use, and we therefore try to bring that experience to bear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister.
When Roberta Bonder flew on the shuttle Discovery, the Science Edition broadcast her live conversation with the Prime Minister.
So far in this flight, and we still have a couple more days, we hope, to be able to do a little bit more. We've enjoyed being with each other and working with each other and learning new things about the world and about how we work and how we view science. And it's just been a fantastic experience, and I just can't wait to get back and start telling people all about it.
Some of our items have ended up in places that we never expected them. Police forces, inquests, even courts across the country have used our stories, sometimes for training and sometimes to help juries understand the complex issues before them. Although still controversial, DNA fingerprinting is becoming an important tool in linking suspects to crimes. DNA fingerprinting uses the suspect's own chromosomes. The basic building blocks of these chromosomes are molecules of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. On closer inspection, the DNA molecule is actually a twisted ladder of base pairs that can be unraveled by chemicals like sodium hydroxide. This molecule is the cornerstone of DNA typing. The final result of this complicated process is an autoradiograph. To the untrained eye, it may seem a bit confusing, but to a forensic expert, it has a lot to say. This autoradiograph is from a murder case. The long striped lanes are the sizing standards. They act as the reference points in the analysis. The DNA in each of the other lanes comes from different samples. One lane contains DNA from the blood of the victim, and one lane contains DNA from the suspect. In the other lanes are the unknown samples collected from the crime scene. The pattern in lane F clearly matches the profile of the suspect. The DNA samples in the other lanes match the victim. In our 1987 program on hit-and-run investigations, the stunt that we staged went terribly wrong, and the stuntman was seriously injured.
Although he spent several months in hospital, the stuntman returned to work for a short while before moving to California. The tape of this accident was requested at the inquest into the death of Canadian swimmer Victor Davis. The jury wanted to understand what happens when someone is hit by a car. Davis was killed when he was hit by a car near Montreal.
Welcome back. I'm Stuart McLean, and tonight Lauren and I are saying farewell after 7 years of the Science Edition. Probably some of the most interesting things we've done over those 7 years have been the times that we've been able to take you to places that, well, neither of us would have got to go to if we hadn't had a camera crew along with us. The Science Edition went into pit row at the Molson Indy to follow the safety crews. Instead of watching the cars speeding down the track, our crews kept an eye on the people behind the scenes. We tagged along with the Horton safety team, who have to respond in the event of an accident on the track. This team and the volunteers at trackside used the latest in safety equipment and procedures.
There's also a tripping hazard here, so just mind. Go. Anyhow, we're right.
Not very many people get to see the face of a nuclear reactor, but the Science Edition team took you inside the reactor core at the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station just last year before it went online. Donna McFarland showed me how fuel bundles spark the nuclear reaction.
So this bundle actually fits inside these channels?
That's right. Inside each of these channels that you see here, there are 13 of the fuel bundles. This is the fuel for a nuclear reactor, like coal is the fuel in a thermal generating station.
Right.
This is basically just the metal sheathing that you see here. What's inside this bundle are these small ceramic uranium dioxide pellets.
This may look unappetizing to you, but to the animals at the Metro Toronto Zoo, it's dinner. We visited the zoo kitchens to watch their meals being prepared. And if this vitamin-packed gelatin wasn't on the menu for everyone, a herring stuffed with vitamins was a pleasant alternative.
The closest thing to being weightless on Earth is the Vomit Comet, or the KC-135 as it's officially known. It's a plane that climbs and dives sharply, and when the plane begins its steep drop, passengers can actually float. We took you into the Vomit Comet to see what astronaut training is really like.
Mining used to be one of the most dangerous jobs that anyone could do. We went 3 kilometers below Sudbury to see how miners are now using machinery to do the dirty work. Canaries, pickaxes, shovels, or relics now. Machinery can drill for ore, find ore samples, or even bore the holes needed for the high explosives. The technology hasn't eliminated all the risk, but it's made a dangerous job just a little safer.
When a Toronto restaurant burned down 5 years ago, the Science Edition team took you behind the scenes to watch fire investigators at work. Charred remains in the ladies' room left more clues about how the fire started than I suppose the arsonist intended. In this case, the fire investigator suspected that a box of toilet paper had started the fire. So samples of the paper that didn't burn were bottled and sent to forensic labs. Sure enough, scientists there found traces of gasoline.
It can take a full day to set up a 20-minute fireworks show, setting the canisters in place, stuffing them with explosives to light up a night sky. From these harmless-looking little bundles to the more impressive-looking and awe-inspiring Big Berthas. A touch of a button can turn these bowling ball packages into starbursts in the sky. And with a little music and computerized choreography, the show comes together with a bang.
I'm Lauren Miller. Hi, I'm Lauren Miller. Tonight we'll meet some of the people who search for these kinds of artifacts. But tonight we'll take a bit of a different twist. We're going to look at protectors of the environment. And tonight we may just alter a few of those stereotypes. Some of the hardest stories we've done over the years have been the medical stories. Even more impressive than the medical technology or new procedures we were looking at were the people that we met. These stories always became stories of personal courage, of personal challenge. They were the stories that personally affected every member of our team.
Now, Jessica, who did you bring anybody here with you? Who are those guys there? Do you know them? Are they friends of yours?
We met 4-year-old Jessica 3 years ago when she was getting ready for her 3rd operation. She was born with a cleft lip and palate, and like most cleft children, Jessica will continue to have operations until she becomes an adult.
What are you going to do? Stay awake. But you got to help.
It's the most common birth defect, and we still don't know why it happens, but that doesn't make it any easier for parents.
Pregnancy and had done everything by the book, sort of thing. So in the sense of, gee, maybe I shouldn't have had the 2nd cup of coffee or that kind of thing, that really wasn't a factor. But I think the inevitable part of you go through a grieving process with any kind of thing like this. So inevitably there's a question of why me? Why did this happen? That kind of thing. And certainly when I talk to my other moms, that's a similar experience, you know, sort of, why did this happen to me? How am I going to cope? You feel really alone.
And in Jessica's particular situation, we concentrated on the nose to try and balance the nose as a unit with its opposite side, because the nose is our leading edge, if you wish. It's what everybody notices the first and the most. And if it's asymmetrical, then it'll attract attention to other lopsided issues related to the lip and so forth.
This has these on so that she won't touch anything. Yeah.
Jessica made it through that surgery, and coming up this summer, she'll be in the operating room again.
But I think she's going to be tougher for this. And that's not necessarily bad to me. I think it will be okay. She can, and I think she will do okay.
And Jessica isn't the only child we've met who knows about hospitals. 9-year-old Eric Bourgeois has the most common form of muscular dystrophy, Duchenne dystrophy. His leg muscles are progressively losing strength. He falls a lot. Last year, he won a trophy for playing baseball, but this year, he won't even be on the team. The Bourgeois family hopes the myoblast transfer experiment will save Eric's wasting muscles.
The best that we hope is this treatments work before it gets too late for Eric, because his muscles are getting harder and harder and smaller. So the less there's muscle, I imagine, the less there's chance of reproducing some more muscle, because actually what's happening is the muscles are degenerating.
Eric is one of 10 boys in the experimental myoblast transfer therapy. Last summer at the Children's Hospital in Montreal, healthy, immature muscle cells called myoblasts were extracted from Eric's father and transplanted into Eric's bicep. The experiment is part of an international effort to find a cure for muscular dystrophy. Dr. George Carpati heads the Canadian research team. Last year, they transplanted healthy myoblast cells into the skeletal muscles of mice. The transplant worked. The immature muscle cells produced dystrophin. Now it's hoped myoblast transfer will work in human experiments. Eric Bourgeois' biceps were injected 110 times. One arm with a solution containing millions of his father's purified myoblasts. The other arm with a pure saline solution, a placebo. Only 2 people on the 12-person team know which arm is which. This allows for a truly blind evaluation of the experiment in the tests to follow.
He's losing his strength in his legs. So even if the treatment works, I wonder if it's going to help Eric. It's not going to give him back his legs, but it might strengthen his muscles in his arms, or he might be able to wheel his chair or whatever. But I have great confidence that it's going to work. I sure hope so for everybody. I try not to worry. I go day by day and
come on. I'm not worried about tomorrow. If he's happy today and we're happy, the hell with tomorrow. That's the, sorry about saying that, that's the way that's the way we do it. Today we worry about today. We try to enjoy his life as much as we can.
October 14th was the day that I came home from work. I found Blair in bed. He weighed 90 pounds. His nail beds were purple. He was coughing up blood. He was bleeding out of his rectum. He was delirious. His fever was 107. He didn't recognize me. And I obviously picked him up in my arms and took him to the hospital. And that was the beginning of, that was the day that we learned of his diagnosis.
Karen Donnan's husband died of AIDS. Her passion now is dispelling the myths that surround this disease. Karen's husband probably contracted AIDS from an infected tattoo needle, something Karen doesn't like to talk about. She believes there's too much emphasis on how victims contract the disease. That lets us judge and categorize AIDS victims, putting a psychological barrier between us and them.
We know that it only takes one time of unprotected sex. How many of us have had one time of sex without a condom in our lives? Does that make us bad people? Does that mean that AIDS is out there, not in here? I don't think so. The teenagers that I know that have AIDS are teenagers that have had one sexual experience in their lives and got full-blown AIDS from it. I know a couple that I just met last week who just got married, and the man's been diagnosed with AIDS. He only had one relationship in his life before his marriage with a woman. Evidently, she was HIV positive. He was someone who believed AIDS was somewhere else, and it isn't. I'm the luckiest person alive to have lived with Blair. I don't know what would have happened to us had he not gotten AIDS. I can't tell the future. But because he got AIDS, we had to grow in ways that most people don't ever have to grow and don't ever challenge themselves to grow. But what that meant, because we didn't have anybody else, is that we turned to each other for everything. And it was scary and it was hard. When I went down to the car and screamed, God, I wish he would die and get this over with, I knew that I could come back home that night and tell him that that happened to me. And rather than getting mad at me, he would put his arms around me and we would cry together and he would say, that's okay, sweetie. And so we got closer than any two people ever get. Excuse me. And I feel really blessed to have had that relationship, to have been a part of his life. And yeah, we lost friends. And after his death, I lost more friends. It's been the loneliest year of my life.
Today, Robbie Newman is having the time of his life. Today, it's time to forget everything and just have fun. Robbie's 4 short years have been unique, unlike any 4-year-old you may know. They've been years filled with medicines, treatments, uncertainty. But today, that world is a million miles away. Robbie Newman is one of the most courageous little guys I've ever met. He and his brother and his mom and dad are HIV positive. The Science Edition team followed the Newmans through their struggles with medications and medical treatments. It was a real eye-opener about how AIDS can affect an entire family.
How are you? Shy?
Robbie has suffered many of the symptoms of pediatric AIDS, like delayed growth, bacterial infections, and oral yeast infections, or thrush. But compared to last year, Robbie is remarkably well.
Just have to get that cleaned up for you. Hi, Robbie.
Last year, the drugs Robbie was treated with made him anemic, so he needed 2 transfusions every month. And because doctors are still learning how to recognize and treat AIDS-related illnesses, sometimes the treatments can be worse than the symptoms. To ease the trauma of 2 transfusions a month, Robbie's dad suggested having the 2 together. Doctors agreed, but then serious complications arose.
When we put the 2 of them together, we found that we were passing too much liquid into his veins, what with the gamma immune transfusion and the blood transfusion and the saline that has to go with it. We actually gave him too much fluids, and it was, I guess, not to put it in a funny term, but he was full. We couldn't get any more into him. We had to turn off the machines and everything. His fever went up to 106. He went beet red, and he started throwing up all over the place. And we took him down for x-rays, and they found that we had put so much liquid into his body that we'd actually enlarged his heart, and we caused his heart to get a bump on it, which is still there to this day. It didn't work. It was just a suggestion of mine, and they figured out afterwards that it was because he had too much liquids, and I was kind of concerned as well. Didn't you know that that might have happened before it actually happened? But doctors are trying, just like the parents and the actual patients are trying to figure out how to take care of this virus.
That's hard not to watch, but not fun watching.
It was very difficult to do because we always had to be there right in on certain things like treatments and all kinds of things. And everyone got very, very involved with each of those people.
Have you been following, though, at all?
Yeah, I do. I call the families every once in a while to see how they're doing. The Newmans are doing fine. They have their ups and downs, as you can imagine, with 4 people HIV positive, and Robbie actually and Mom showing full-blown AIDS. So as they get AIDS-related illnesses, their health goes up and down, and emotions go up and down, and the whole thing. Eric isn't...
The little boy with muscular dystrophy.
Yeah, he's undergoing the experimental treatment, the injections in his bicep. He's not doing as well. He's going downhill. One of Mom's biggest worries was that he would lose his strength in his arms, and he's done that now. So some are good, some not so good.
Well, here's to them.
Yeah.
Science doesn't only affect human lives. We share this planet with thousands of living things. And understanding the behavior and function of other species has long been a scientific focus. In the past 7 years, we've introduced you to some interesting creatures and hopefully given you a better understanding of the effect that these animals have on our lives, as well as the impact that we can have on theirs. We visited the Metro Toronto Zoo to see how science is assisting nature.
Indira is a 3-ton Indian rhinoceros, one of about 1,700 left in the world. Traditionally, Indian rhinos don't breed well in captivity, but Indira has had some help. Every morning after Indira was let out, a sample of her urine was collected from the floor of her pen. In the lab, the urine was analyzed, and by monitoring levels of estrogen and progesterone, researchers found they could determine when Indira was ovulating, or in heat. With this information, the zoo staff knew the best time to introduce Indira to Patrick, on loan from the Bronx Zoo in New York.
Come here.
The birth of a cheetah is always
We also looked at how the zoo uses artificial insemination to breed cheetahs and other big cats in captivity. This research will hopefully allow future offspring to be reintroduced into the wild.
Bruno, place.
In Montreal, we met Pruno. He's a capuchin monkey who was being trained to help disabled people with tasks most of us take for granted.
No, place. Oui.
We also looked at how the careless breeding of dogs is leading to a dramatic increase in genetic defects. Inbreeding has led to frequent eye and hip problems in many of the most popular types of dogs. Dogs may be our best friend, but some of our most popular programs have focused on our enemies.
Well, there's also the American cockroach, which is a much bigger cockroach. As you go south, let's say Carolina and point south and into Florida and in the Caribbean, in Central America, you find many, many more varieties of cockroaches, big ones as well. People stand up on chairs when they see these things coming.
In order for a mosquito to transmit a disease, it must pick up a pathogen. That pathogen may be a virus, may be a nematode, it may be a plasmodium or a protozoa, and it has to pick it up from a sick animal. So it feeds on that animal, and in taking the blood up, the virus or the bacteria goes into the body of the mosquito and then replicates and reproduces in the mosquito.
If you're a homeowner, there's one insect you never want to see. Well, actually finding it can be kind of difficult. However, the damage it causes is easy to spot, and these telltale signs can make property values plummet. They're left by the termite.
Because of this, mussel-infested lakes have doubled.
5 years ago, few people had ever heard of the zebra mussel, but as we reported a few years ago, this unwelcome visitor from Europe has started to choke Canadian rivers and lakes, and the speed of the invasion has scientists worried.
This past summer, the ministry research team found up to 450,000 mussels per square meter on Lake Erie reefs. Scientists are convinced that the mussels are nowhere near their peak. In fact, some speculate it may be 10 years before we see any decline in their explosive growth. 2 years ago, another reporter joined the Science Edition, or should I say rejoined. Bruce Moen started out as a researcher 5 years ago and then became our BC correspondent. Now, Bruce tried his best to interject some levity into the Science Edition, but we're a serious information show, so we cut a great deal of his humor. But just because this is the last show, we're going to take one last look at some of Bruce's better moments.
To understand how an accelerator works, let's try a little demonstration. But remember, and if you're thinking of building an accelerator in your home, please consult a professional first. 16 kids attend the Elizabeth Buckley School. Well, 17 today. But I wasn't leaving the fair without losing some money on the chicken bone reader. He calls himself Shamada, and he calls his readings a blessing. No kidding.
So, Barry, what did the woman have to say?
Well, she looked at my picture and told me that I was a person of high intellect and creativity, which was absolutely true, and then she told me that I have serious back problems, which is not true.
Inside, there's a treat on the stove for Nellie's visitors. Is this going to get me drunk?
Yeah.
Are you going to have some?
No, I want to see how you make out. I'm testing it on you.
All of it down? Okay.
We got Bruce Moen in our Vancouver studio right now, so how was the tea?
Hi, Stuart. The tea was delicious, actually. It was kind of a little bit bitter, but it felt good going down.
Now, all that stuff made it to air. Did we ever cut anything out? Did we ever not let you run anything?
Well, there was one little thing. It was a favorite of mine. I did interviews with two bee specialists. And one of them said that his partner often created bee beards, which is where you put this honey stuff in your face and all these beards or bees collect to it. But this guy actually had a beard. So when he came up on screen, I had a little arrow come up and the words beside it said, "Not a bee beard." But you guys took it out.
We did. We took it out. I like the bee beard, Bruce. I really did.
Oh, thank you, Lauren.
Now, tell me, your relationship with us at the Science Edition is more than just our BC correspondent. Tell us just a little bit about the whole network of educational networks that have got together.
Well, BC came into the Science Edition, I guess, last season, and shortly after that, Alberta joined, and so did Saskatchewan. So there's 4 provinces now that help out in producing the Science Edition, and we're hoping to extend that eventually. But right now, it's probably the closest thing we have to a national educational science show.
Now listen, tonight's supposed to be a night of look-backs, but I understand you've managed to shoehorn a new item into this program.
We have one more item to show. I went
never
out this
seen
winter.
before.
I took a look at a couple of rivers, and there's two key industries here in BC. One generates electrical power, and the other one is salmon fishing. And the two tend to conflict. When we need hydropower, we need to hold back the water, but that's when the salmon need the water. So right now they're working out a system where we can release a certain amount of water to the fish when they need it. I visited two rivers, the Coquitlam and the Stave River, not too far from Vancouver. This is Coquitlam Lake. It used to be Coquitlam River until they put this baby in 1914. It's an earth dam, and it forces most of the water out that way towards a hydroelectric generating station. Over on this side is what's left of the Coquitlam River. Downstream a ways, past the first tributary, and upstream of the gravel pits and suburban cul-de-sacs of Coquitlam, a few salmon each year struggle to spawn. At this time of year, coho and chum salmon eggs are incubating on the river bottom here. These are anadromous salmon. That means that they live most of their lives in the ocean, but they're born and they die in places like this. BC's salmon fishing industry can pull in a good year 100,000 tons of salmon out of the water, and that means that we need every spawning ground we can find. A healthy fish population would also supply anglers with more to angle. And one could argue that a Northwest river isn't a complete river without a thriving salmon run. But for salmon, life downstream from a hydro dam isn't easy. In fact, it's not even guaranteed. A sudden spill can wash the eggs away. Not enough water can leave the salmon much too dry for their liking. For all sorts of reasons, salmon and hydropower just don't mix all that well. Salmon and hydropower installations could probably coexist quite happily if we could figure out a way to store electricity efficiently. But we can't. The only way hydroelectric power can be stored is in the form of stored water that can then be poured through turbines to generate instant power where it's needed. After the water spins the turbines, it spills out into the river below. A steady flow of water through the turbines would be fine for the fish. But our demand for electricity is anything but steady. We want lots of it when we wake up in the morning. We want lots when we get home and start dinner. We don't want much at all in the middle of the night. We also need more in the winter than we need in the summer. This means there's more water flowing down the river in the winter, less in the summer. And this doesn't always suit the life cycle of the salmon. Steve McFarland is a biologist with the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and he's been working with BC Hydro to try and improve the quality of life for the Coquitlam fish.
A wide variety of parameters need to be taken into account to determine how much water is needed to provide at least a minimum amount of coverage. Similarly, you want, in terms of rearing periods, the summertime, whatever, you want to make sure that there's, again, enough water to make sure that the pools have regular interchange. The oxygen is kept up, that water temperatures are maintained within desirable levels.
A small flow often means a warmer flow of water, and salmon prefer things quite cool.
Associated with increased temperatures, there tends to be a decrease in the oxygen levels in water, and that can be pretty dramatic. In very hot water, you can literally sap the oxygen out of the system to a point where it's no longer tolerable for fish, and you can have fish kills.
The river below the dam has recorded temperatures up to 25 degrees Celsius in the summer. Not a comfortable temperature for salmon. The Coquitlam Reservoir's water is diverted through a series of tunnels to two generating plants on Indian Arm. Their 75 megawatts of electricity top up Vancouver's power supply at peak load periods. It's also seen as an emergency supply if power from the big hydro generating projects to the north and east is cut off. So power requirements from the river can fluctuate quite a bit. Tributaries and runoff create a new Coquitlam River below the dam. And chum, coho, and pink salmon spawn in the gravel beds there, along with steelhead and cutthroat trout.
There are people that want to fish the Coquitlam River. there still is the potential to substantially increase stocks. It may seem that a few hundred coho doesn't sound like a lot of fish, but by today's standards in an urban environment, that's a fairly good run in an urban stream.
The Coquitlam Valley, only 30 kilometers from downtown Vancouver, has been for years a good source of aggregates for the building trade, which has in turn been a source of silt for the river running just beside the pits.
If silt levels reach abnormal levels through different activities, urban development, whatever, it can have a fairly dramatic effect on all stages of the salmon's life cycle.
A relatively steady flow of cold water from the lake would make life for these fish a whole lot easier and help in creating better spawning opportunities upriver. But since 1914, that water has been held for generating power and supplying fresh water to nearby communities through pumping stations like this one. The salmon, until a few years ago, weren't taken into consideration. Although salmon will never get past the Coquitlam Dam, the stretch of river below the dam is by no means a doomed salmon river. There are things we can do, and on other rivers, these things are being done. 30 miles to the east of here, there's another salmon spawning ground below a hydroelectric project. And these days, the salmon there are a little bit happier. This is a stave river near Mission. The Ruskin Dam was built in 1930, only a few kilometers from the stave's confluence with the Fraser River. And above it, no salmon can go. But below it, up to 100,000 spawn each year. The fish that spawn here are of considerable importance to BC's annual salmon catch. A benefit-cost study showed that the loss of potential power generation to assist the fishery would be more than offset by the market value of the salmon spawned. This is a case of some profit from one industry being sacrificed for more profits in another, benefiting, it's hoped, the province as a whole. But 4 years ago, the fish were at the mercy of our fluctuating demands for electricity. Dave Wilson is a fisheries biologist with BC Hydro.
Prior to 1989, the power units, the generators, were shutting off during spawning and incubation, fall and winter, and not providing enough water for the fish spawning below the powerhouse.
But now, with a water release agreement between Hydro and Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the operators of the dam have been trying to release to this fish population the right amount of water at the right times for them to spawn, incubate, hatch, and swim back to the ocean. A joint committee of federal and provincial fish habitat people and hydro specialists continue to iron out the fine points of these water releases. Hydro engineer Mike Lee wants to know whether the spawning channels will hold up to occasional emergency releases of up to 6,000 cubic feet of water per second.
Do we require any further modification of the downstream channel to allow us to discharge 6,000 CFS?
I don't know.
Now, what would concern me, though, if you held it at 6,000 for an extended period of time, giving fish enough time to start spawning on the marginal bars, and then when we drop it back down to 3,000 or 2,000, then we lose all those fish.
We are hoping that you will design the channel such that you were able to accommodate the 6,000.
Well, our side channels should. I really believe that the side channels will build, the fish can spawn at 6,000, and if it drops down, they'll still do all right.
You want the ability to discharge 6,000, but only for small periods of time within the normal block period, or do you want it? Are you looking to do it for 6 weeks?
If the inflow is high enough, we'll do it for 6 weeks. It all depends on the inflow situation.
We're put it's a difficult situation. I mean, I don't like it any more than Mike does, but I would like to work something out. If we can show that that the channel can handle it and it's not going to result in stranding of fish and stuff like that, I think we should look at it. I mean, but the important thing to do is to try and maintain a constant volume over the prescribed period, though, and that's what we should be looking at.
I think the difference is, what is the maximum constant release? Should it be 4,000 or should it be 6,000? We would like to able to move that 4,000 up to 6,000.
Okay.
The higher the limit, the better we can manage the reservoir to avoid any spill.
Dave Wilson knows that inevitably there will have to be occasional large releases for two reasons.
There could be situations, for example, when a power line out of the main transmission network goes down and there's a requirement for more power out of this station, which would cause a higher amount of water. The other situation is a large amount of rainfall, inflow into the reservoir, snowmelt, would cause a spill, which is what we're trying to avoid, because a spill would do damage to the eggs incubating in the gravel.
BC Hydro is also finalizing an agreement with Fisheries and Oceans for cold water releases to the Coquitlam River through a valve to be placed under the spillway this spring. It's estimated the additional water will mean about 2,300 more salmon will return next year to spawn. Below the dam, McFarland shows me where spawning channels like those on the Stave will be built to return up to 2,000 additional salmon youngsters to the Pacific each season. But in this case, the dollar value of fish isn't larger than the dollar value of lost power. Gradually, agencies are accepting a much wider definition of the value of the wild things in our rivers. More and more people are saying, what price nature? And concluding that it's priceless. There are other larger hydroelectric projects in this province, and it's not so easy to control their water releases. And there are plans for more plants if we continue to increase our demand for electricity. So one of the best ways to make life a little easier for the salmon is to reduce our dependency on electricity. That's Vancouver back there. I wonder how many of those lights they actually need right now. My bet, not all of them. Look around you right now. How much of the electricity you're using do you really need to use right now? My bet, not all of it. So think of the fish every once in a while and flick a switch. Down.
So you're setting it to a certain time. Oh, God!
This is your last chance, or we'll replace you with Pokeroo.
It might be best.
Ouch! Oh, did he bite you? Did he bite the skin?
No.
Cut! We use the science of technology every day, like the laser beam in your CD player, the microwave in your kitchen, the computer in your office. And there's no way you can work on a science show for 7 years and not delve into some of the innovative things that researchers are pulling out of the lab. And we've tried to keep track of that technology and put it in context for daily life. And what used to be cutting edge, we now take for granted. The cellular telephone used to be part of science fiction, like something Dick Tracy would have used. Now there's something we can't seem to live without. Researchers are trying to get this video conferencing technology into every office. And now people meet face-to-face over the phone.
Looking at you, it's as if you're sitting across the table from me. So if you now look over to Lauren, then he's looking in that direction.
This camera has no film in it, but he knows that. It's a digital camera, and it records images directly onto a disc. It doesn't mean photographs are obsolete. The digital pictures can be stored and printed later. Or if you have a TV handy, you can look at them right away.
Plug it into the back of the unit, and right away we can watch what images we've shot with and review them.
Magnetic resonance imaging is still very expensive, but it gives doctors a better picture of what's going on inside. And more hospitals are investing in it. And is absorbed by a detector that feeds this information into a computer. This Jarvik heart was designed to replace a real one in patients waiting for a transplant. Researchers are now working on artificial pumps that don't replace the heart, but help keep it going.
There's a valve located here for inflow, a valve located here for outflow.
Technology can help disabled people lead normal lives. These myoelectric limbs are designed to be activated by impulses from a patient's own muscles, eliminating the need for bulky mechanical devices.
So simply by pressing my elbow, I'm able to send messages to the keyboard and the sound modules.
Researchers have taken accessibility a step further. They've used computers to make it easier for people with special needs to play a tune or share a joke.
Okay, why?
Because she liked crummy jokes.
Technology has also made it safer and easier for most of us to get around.
In many of the early designs, they tried other things such as compressed air, but they were too complicated. This appears to be the best system we can have with the reliability built-in we must have, and at the same time operate in the microseconds that we need.
Pathfinder is being tested in Los Angeles. It combines an off-the-shelf navigational computer with real-time traffic information from the Caltrans Control Center.
Venice, heavily congested.
New technology is even used to answer age-old questions. This global positioning satellite system was perched on the top of Mount Logan, helping researchers find out just how high Canada's highest mountain is.
Well, we looked back at a lot of items while we were preparing tonight's show. And one thing that we've learned is that we've covered a lot of ground over the last 7 years. Considering all that we've done, we thought it would be right to end this program with a few words about the issues that came up most often over the years. There were 3 ideas that seemed to emerge season after season. First, the need for more research and development in Canada. Second, the need for more women in science. And third, the need to improve our standard of science education.
When the Science Edition began 7 years ago, Canada lagged behind other industrialized countries in research and development. Now, unfortunately, that remains the same. Canada's wealth depends largely on its natural resources. But to survive, we will have to depend both culturally and economically on another natural resource, our brain power. That's why we've stressed over the years a need for research and development.
Now, we've stressed the need for women to be active in science and engineering for the same reasons. In a story we did 4 years ago, we learned that many young girls give up on science early in high school. Well, nothing's changed there either. During our years on the air, we've tried to introduce you to a variety of women working in all aspects of science.
And we also tried to make science fun and interesting for the whole family. Polls show that most Canadians feel they don't know much about science. They're even afraid of it. That's why we tried to show everyone the science in everyday life. By showing the wide range of science applications, we hope to encourage the young people in our audience to stick with it.
Well, they may be able to stick with it, and we hope you do too, but we can't. Our run's over. It's time for the fat lady to sing. That's it for this week and for this program. For the last time, on behalf of all of us here at the Science Edition, I'm Stuart McLean. Good night.
Good night.
So.
Cold. It's so cold!
How you doing? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, Ryan. Let's take 6.
We want to go on the Flintstone Flyboys, Dad. Okay.
And that's what makes the miracle of flying.
How's your exposure? It says low light. I don't know why.
We get to go to all the fun spots.
This is probably your fault.
I love wearing this.
I hate you. The next shot, you gotta wait on.